Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Jim Rugg.
I'm Ed Piskor.
And I'm Tom Scholey.
And today we're going to talk about Sandman 3, Dream a Little Dream of Me.
We still have the same artistic creative team, Sam Keith, Mike Drinenberg, but this is the issue where I think Mike D really starts doing the heavy lifting when it comes to the pencil chores. The characters no longer look like these cartoony Sam Keith heads. I'm detecting far more photo reference than what I've seen Sam Keith kind of ever do.
The story starts out with a junkie.
Yes.
Not to cut off your art. This is going back to the art comment, Ed. But it starts off with a junkie, and then we go to John Constantine, and it's set in the UK, and we speculated that Mike D might be English, possibly in London. So that may be part of the reason that some of the art feels a little bit more like him and a little bit less like Sam Keith. Because of the setting, it may be something he's more familiar with.
Genius.
So the story does begin with a woman who is basically addicted and using Sandman's powder, his dream dust. And it opens on her. Basically, it's a drug addict. The narrator's talking about how she's been ravaged by this addiction. And the dream dust is basically what keeps her going, what keeps her alive at this point.
Very important panel when you see the hand in the open bag, because it'll be established a little bit later on in the issue that try as he may, when Constantine bought the bag of sand, he can never get it open. It was like magically sealed somehow. So the fact that it's now open, it's leaving a lot of things up for possibility. And we have to see just how powerful this dream dust is. And there are two ways that we do that in this issue. We have the junkie girl who's addicted to the stuff, but now there's an intruder. And the whole point of the intruder, man, is to naively wander into this place, man, that's full of, like the dreams are kind of run amok. We're going to see what happens to that guy a little bit later on in this issue.
Now, some of the undertones of this setup, it's the late 80s. She's desiccated by this dream sand that she's been, ingesting in various ways. She talks about different ways she can take it. She can put it in her mouth, do all kinds of stuff with it. It seems to me that this is like it's like somebody getting AIDS from intravenous drug use. Like that's the touchstone for this. This is the thing that makes you sort of feel it. And there's a point in the story where we do see on the TV screen like AIDS, like just the word AIDS, but like it feels like it was it kind of talking about that.
Let's hold on that.
Okay.
Because we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. We should say this is kind of a continuation from the previous issue, in that what's happened in the previous issue is we established that Dream Morpheus is looking for his bag, his powder of dream dust, a ruby amulet, and his helmet. And his first idea is to go after the dust because he believes it is with a human, John Constantine, and that he is most capable of confronting a human at this stage. He's still in a weakened state. He's trying to amass these tools to kind of return to strength. And so his first stop is going to be with John Constantine. So we go from a glimpse of this junkie using this dream dust to then John Constantine's flat, and him waking up to a song on his radio alarm clock that references dreams.
Yeah, and this the title of this chapter is "Dream a Little Dream of Me," which is another song. So, like all through this issue, he's going to be hearing various songs about dreams and dreaming and the dreamer, and he says something is trying to tell me someone. Yeah. There's something in the universe that's trying to let me know that something's coming my way. And when he's first listening to the radio announcer kind of sounds like the Crypt Keeper, which I thought was like a really cool gimmick, like to have a radio announcer who's basically the Crypt Keeper. He's like, "Hey, flesh crawlies, here's a moldy old," Right.
I did not even notice that. That's interesting. Yeah, that's good. We continue to follow Constantine. He goes about his day. He goes to a diner. While at the diner, he spies Mad Hattie outside, and she kind of calls him out, or him sing, or draws him out, and she gives him this message, continuing this idea of this message that everybody in the universe is trying to tell him something.
This keeps along with your earlier idea, Tom, in episode 1 about magical realism, because Mad Hattie is 275 years old. It's acknowledged, but it has no bearing on the story or anything like that. Yeah, 275-year-old lady.
She tells him something, and he discounts what she tells him, along with her age, and he acknowledges the age part's accurate.
Yeah.
So he goes back to his apartment, and he's like digging around in his apartment for something else when he hears a knock at the door, and it's Morpheus.
Yeah, and at this point, I guess we should sort of say that John Constantine, he was an Alan Moore Swamp Thing character. That's where he was created. That's where he's pretty much known up to this point. And Dream says something, and John Constantine makes some reference to, like, the kind of people he hangs out with, green swamp creatures, and so it's not that big a deal. Like a 300-year-old woman and the Lord of Dreams coming in is just another day for John Constantine.
Yeah, he's a pretty cool customer through all of this. Pretty unfazed by Morpheus's appearance in his apartment. Dream is there for the dream dust. He tells him that Constantine doesn't have it in his apartment, but he thinks it's in his storage unit.
Yeah. Russell's about, looks for some papers or something because it's not, can't quite remember until, what is it, like a photo of the junkie girl?
Yeah, him and her.
Yeah, sort of falls out, and he's like, oh, I know who has it.
So he gets his buddy Chaz, who has a taxi, to give Constantine and Dream a ride to go to Rachel's house. Before they get there, we have a cutaway of a cat burglar that's breaking into her house. Ed, you alluded to this. He's breaking into the house. It's explained in captions that this is just sort of a thing people were doing at the time. It's
For a
kind of
thrill.
Yeah, he's like an insurance agent or something.
Yeah.
So fun.
And he breaks into the house and enters this ecstatic dream state and sort of is incapacitated but also just overwhelmed by dreams. So that's our inkling of how powerful this stuff is.
And Sandman Morpheus is not so weak. Constantine kind of busts on him like, man, I'm not going to get on a bus with you, dude, with this whack gear that you have. And with like a click of the fingers, man, he now has like a more normal kind of gothish attire.
He has the same coat as Constantine, just a different color, but it's the same outfit.
They'll do some interesting things too, man. Where like they're just like little faces built in. Like it's sort of
Yeah,
like the coat
cool.
fades off into these faces with use of zipatone and junk. And we will see a lot of that like throughout the series, like when we oscillate into real world and dream world, and or just when you see Morpheus's character, like sort of anything is possible. We did a Wizard episode where it was a Kelly Jones interview talking about some of the things he wanted to bring to the character, and the idea of like this flowing attire in a room that has no breeze and junk like that.
Yeah, and even a variation of his appearance within the
Yeah.
same scene, because whenever you dream things, it's not always like crystal clear.
Yeah,
and
it's not consistent.
Right. Yeah, that stuff's real interesting, and you wonder again, like, where did these ideas come from? Is this Neil Gaiman planting these seeds with his artists? Is it stuff artists are bringing to it? And we talk about credits in different places. It's so hard to nail this stuff down. To give credit where credit's due. Everybody wants to give credit properly, but I mean, ideas come up in conversation or in a drawing that's misinterpreted by somebody, and then it's like, ooh, we should always do that, or that should be a quality of this character. So they're going to Junkie Rachel's house to try to find this bag of powder. On the way, they play another Dream song on the car radio. I should note they play another Dream song whenever he's in the diner before this. So
They're all through the issue.
Yeah, they keep hitting that. On the way, Constantine warns his buddy Chaz, the driver, once they get there, if there's any trouble, take off. I don't want your blood on my hands.
Your old lady would never forgive me.
Yes. Meanwhile, turn around and Morpheus basically gives John Constantine this same spiel of like, there's something wrong with this house.
Yeah.
You don't have to come in here with me. And Constantine's like, no, I'm down for this. This is where I live.
At this point, like, we're in sort of a classic horror setup where this becomes a haunted house story. It's a haunted and like, a very early Doctor Strange story was exactly this. You go into this it's you versus the haunted house. This is just sort of like a modern 80s spin on the haunted house.
Yes, and this is one of those places that I make a note that the visuals disappoint, because we learn all of this through words. Whether it's Morpheus warning John Constantine about the dangers in this house. Once they get into the house, there's like an organic element that they interpret to be Rachel's dad and the remains of Rachel's dad, who's still alive, but like it's organic matter on the walls,
spread thin and growing.
And they describe it very clearly, the two characters, as they're walking through this house, because the visuals just don't bring this across. I kept thinking David Cronenberg as I'm like reading the characters describing what I'm seeing, but not what was on the page.
I felt like a Nightmare on Elm Street, like part whatever, like whatever sequel, but like it was like Freddy Krueger kind of imagery where there's like, just skin and stuff and like faces emerging from it and things like that. And like, Nightmare on Elm Street was a relatively recent movie, and it is about a guy who like jumps into your dreams and does things to you in your dreams. So that's, sort of probably on Gaiman's mind with this.
Yeah, the other, besides the organic matter that's sort of taken over the walls and they describe the stench several times, there are also these little, almost creatures that have voices that are coming out and saying negative things.
Yeah, and those are the dreams.
Dreamers.
Like dreams that escaped from the bag of or whatever, right?
Yeah, the Sandman. His power comes from tapping the power of all the dreamers in the world. That's where his powers come from. So that's like those faces that are in his cloak and things like that. And then these faces in the wall, I'm interpreting as like these are other sort of dreamers whose like dreams are sort of coming in via this way. So these are like more of those like faces of dreamers. And when they're sort of scary and horrifying for like Constantine, but once they recognize Dream, they're like, oh shit, hey, yes sir, no sir, they snap into line because they recognize their boss.
One thing that I think is really worth noting here, and we'll see many examples throughout the series, this is sort of how Gaiman got noticed in the culture just outside of like the Wednesday Warrior, where he has a sensitivity to kind of every kind of facet of human society, like every stratum of human being. Like here's what I'm trying to say. This is the first time in a mainstream comic, probably, that we have a junkie character, and it's not a fucking villain who's going to like try to stab you and take all your money. Constantine loves this girl, and she is a junkie. And there may have been independent comics that treated these people as people, and in this world we live in now with like an opiate addiction, we realize that like our cousins are hooked on something, and they're not villains.
It feels very well, that aspect of it feels very well observed. Like it could be based on somebody he knew. Or
yes, and like throughout the series, we're going to see like in mainstream comics the first examples of queer characters, gay characters, people from all over the map. The parody between the Endless. It's like 3 boys, 3 girls, and Desire. Was just like a kind of a pan character. It's very cool, and I think it is worth noting because before this, it just wasn't in there.
Mm-hmm.
So they get to Rachel. They step over the guy who's in the dream state. By the way, the burglar.
Yes.
They find her in a terrible state. Physically,
yes.
in a really bad state.
We get a splash page of that.
Yes, we don't see her in the beginning, but they're sort of in the captioning. It's hinted at how bad she is, and then we get to see her here, and she looks like a zombie. She looks terrible.
Let me ask you this, because it's when you see her there, it's supposed to be a payoff image. So how did you feel about it? Because you talked about the imagery of entering the house. So how did you feel about her look, man?
I think it's a little bit
doesn't quite work.
Underwhelming. Like you guys are both talking about the virtue of his depiction of drug addiction, and I think maybe from a writing standpoint it works. But I had the note that it seems shallow, easy, and simple.
Yes.
Almost. She looks like a zombie. I just described her that way. I don't know. It's weird. It feels like it's very cartooning in ways that we have now seen lots of comic examples where we're not limited by cartoony. Like the visual language now is virtually anything you've ever seen. But at this stage, it is very limited. It's very cartoony. And so, it's this serious matter, but we're walking through like this Nightmare David Cronenberg cartoon landscape, and then we see her and she looks like a cartoon zombie. She looks very similar to Toxic Avengers comic that Marvel's publishing at the same time, to a very different tone. I don't know. It's mixed.
It still is a DC comic. Like it still has roots of what you said in an earlier episode, like a DC kind of like house style, where it's like still bound by those restraints of a Jack Kirby idiom or something.
It feels like Gaiman's, what he's expressing and what he's writing about is further ahead than the visuals are able to depict.
Well said.
And sometimes he does well and he's able to overcome that. And sometimes, I don't know, if you ask me about the visuals, they're not up to what he's writing in this story, in my opinion.
In mainstream comics, we've been living through this writer era for a really, really long time, where the writer is considered the dominant creative force in mainstream comics. And part of that was sort of maybe blamed on Image Comics, because like those artists didn't deliver on the writing side enough. But the other side of the argument, like I feel like Neil Gaiman, we're seeing the beginning of that argument where it's like Neil Gaiman is the creative force behind this. The artist is just along for the ride. I'm simplifying here.
Yeah,
of course.
sure.
But that like this is the beginning of that way of viewing comics. Like this this is the thing to emulate. Have a writer who like really knows his stuff, lays everything out, and then just find whoever the best guy you can find in the moment to do the art. And we've been living through a couple decades of that paradigm.
Yeah, I'm comfortable saying that the British invasion spearheaded these ideas, and there was a bleeding edge period of time. A lot of the art in this is a part of that. Jesus, take a look at Animal Man again with Grant Morrison, that Chad Truog or that stuff is weird art. It's very, very crude.
I want to get through the plot, and then
Sure.
we can kind of like pick apart some of the details
Yeah.
that are in here. Dream finds his sand. They're there. That's what they came for. He's got it. Constantine's kind of devastated by what he sees. Again, good writing. You've established there's a relationship and feelings here. So to see somebody in pain, maybe it weighs more now because we're seeing Constantine's reaction to seeing somebody he cares about in pain. Dream says once the dust is removed, she's going to die. And so Constantine kind of asks him to make it pleasant.
Right, because he says, yeah, she's going to die. It's probably really going to hurt, too, he says.
Yeah.
But very matter-of-factly.
So he tells Constantine to leave, and he'll take care of it, and he does. And she has we see her, I guess, dying.
Her last thoughts.
Yeah, her dream as she expires, and it's with Constantine. It's kind of a happy ending for her. And goes outside. They make their sort of goodbyes. Constantine asks Dream for a favor to fix up a nightmare that he's been dealing with for like 10 years.
Yeah, he mentions the Newcastle affair, which is like another thing from Swamp Thing. In Swamp Thing, John Constantine would always hint at this like old case that he just did called in Newcastle that went really, really bad. And I don't know that in Alan Moore's Swamp Thing if they ever like tell you what happened. It's just one of those like backstory things. So it's like, yeah, I've been having nightmares ever since Newcastle, and then Dream kind of says, okay, I'll take care of that for you. And then it like immediately it's like he feels this lifted. And so all these songs that have been kind of dirge like, all these now become the sort of snappy, peppy Mr. Sandman, Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream, and he's got like a little pep in his step.
Yeah, so one of my faults with Gaiman on this story is this happy ending. We're struggling to show this drug addiction. We're already struggling for the art to keep up with that idea, and then Sandman throws his magic dust on her, and she dies happily, and then we see Constantine sort of go off singing his pop song, and it's like we've completely undermined the idea of drug addiction as this horrendous thing. It's a weird choice to me.
This is the love of his life, suppose like at least he's the love of her life, and we get the impression that she was kind of the love of his life, and it was because of her addiction they went their separate ways, and I mean I'm not saying this to counter what you're saying, I'm just sort of like embellishing but that dream that Morpheus gives her of the happy ending for those two. There's like one idea out there of like what is if there's an afterlife, what is it? And like one of the ideas I'd heard that kind of stuck with me was that whatever your last thought is when you die, that thought lasts forever. So you're like frozen in that moment forever. And sort of like the eternal waking that happens to Burgess Jr. in issue 1. I think of that as sort of like this, that she's going to live in this moment of bliss, like that kind of like lasts for it, like that last thought that she has in her, and that's her afterlife, and it'll last forever the same way a thought can extend forever.
I'm good with it. It's a happy ending. Yeah. Why not? I like a happy ending. Who doesn't like a happy ending? All I'm saying is, if you're going to do a serious story or have a serious issue such as drug addiction, you undermine the weight of that by being like, oh, let me sprinkle some happy dust on it here at the end. Like you take, like there are other topics. If you applied this to certain other topics, you wouldn't get away with it. You would be called for this, oversimplifying these things, making them too easy, making it too simple and happy in the end. I guess nobody's, standing up on behalf of junkies, but it just feels like you take a subject matter that's challenging to depict with the language of comic books to begin with, and then you add a cartoon ending to the end of it, and you end up with this thing that feels funny to me. and not funny in a good way.
No, yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, you give me something to think about, but just reading the issue, it's like, yeah, junkie girlfriend, but it's there, but it's almost just like one of her character traits. Like it would be like replace that with obese or something. Like I don't think it's like she's treated as a person and given a little bit more dimension and not vilified, but it's like it's kind of just whatever. Like it's not the biggest plot point or anything. I mean, she is,
and we're moving at a steady clip. Like he's trying to make these like sort of self-contained story as much as they're part of a series.
It's 5% of the story.
Yeah,
Whatever that's worth.
Alan Moore has talked about learning through Watchmen and stuff, learning the limits of trying to talk about a serious issue in the form of superhero comics. That just the form itself undermines and undercuts whatever sort of argument you're trying to make, and like maybe we're seeing that here.
Yeah, I think 100%. I agree with that, and I think it is on display here. One of the details that I do like, whenever they enter the house, and they kind of, Dream sort of takes control of the little dreams that are, all around, and it's almost like orders, they get back in control.
yeah,
The panels are skewed.
yes,
And Todd Klein's lettering, you mentioned earlier in a previous issue review, Todd Klein being a big part of this kind of the Sandman aesthetic, his lettering skews with it. And it's a nice effect. It's a very small formal thing. It's not going to disrupt anyone's reading, but aesthetically it fits. It's nice. It's a detail that supports what's happening visually and what's happening with the story. So small thing, but I like those small things. You get a few of those right, and you end up with a comic that to me rises above the grind of like just monthly disposable entertainment.
yeah. You have to work on these damn things at a fever pitch. Just doing, like I did the Hip Hop Family Tree, like 12 issues monthly, and that material was almost all pretty much done. Like I was just harvesting old rope, so to speak. But I had to draw fresh splash pages, I had to draw fresh covers, and I had to draw fresh write fresh synopsises. You have to work on 3 issues in tandem in various states when you're doing a monthly comic, and I was just repurposing existing material, not using originals.
Yeah.
Not coming up with like original thoughts and all that. So like seeing behind the curtain, like I'm sensitive to the workflow and all that, and a part of that is sort of I think why we're sitting here talking, because under those conditions of a monthly grind, the book rarely ever didn't meet deadline. It was rarely late. There's almost nothing you can compare it to in terms of quality when it comes to monthly comics.
Yeah. I have been underwhelmed by Colorist so far.
Yeah.
I don't feel like the coloring is bringing much to the storytelling.
I think again it's like the unflattering format, the bleeding edge nature of it. Like if it were just a couple years prior on newsprint, it might look totally different.
With the same old formula.
Yeah.
What Tatiana Wood did on Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
Sublime.
Right.
Sublime. French chef kiss. I said French
Well,
kiss.
that's part of how you overcome that deadline, right? Is like you have a letterer, Todd Klein, who shows up and does lettering, handles it very professionally, creatively, high level of craft. If you have everybody kind of operating at the level, you have the chance where these things really hum and really kind of fit. And maybe it'll come together a little bit more, as everybody finds their footing.
I don't think so.
But looking at these first couple of issues, that's one of those things that I looked at and was like, the coloring rarely feels like it's singing to me.
Yeah, not at all, unfortunately. And throughout the history of comics, whenever new techniques are introduced, you need a Kevin Nolan to show people how to do it. You need like an artist, like a capital A artist, to kind of show you how things are done, man. So like take a look at some Kevin Nolan stuff like that's on like a Baxter paper, and you will see him put that color palette to use, those extra colors. But through the history of comics, whenever these new techniques present themselves, and you now have more bells and whistles and more crayons in the crayon box, it screws up the colorist's mind. Take a look at any Kamiko comic, and they would bolster the fact that they had 200 colors. Most of those colors were cut with black, and it looks like diarrhea.
Yes. All right, story-wise, I have a question for both of you, and that is the thief. What happens to the thief? He's just laying there dreaming the whole... Basically, he breaks in and just goes off in his dreams.
I think his whole purpose is to just show you kind of like the different things that these that these dreams and these things that got loose from the dust, and the fact that this house is now under some sort of supernatural hold. You enter regular guys, like, so this guy isn't a junkie from 20 years back.
Right.
This is an insurance salesman who just robs people for fun. Super normal guy. Put him in there and just like let's let John Constantine, who has a lot of weird stuff happen to him, but basically a normal guy. Let's see what could happen if things go sideways for Constantine. I think that's the only function, because there isn't much. That's the only excuse I can give.
It's the heroine, you know, like in movies, whenever like Train Spotting or something, we're sort of showing like heroine's the greatest thing in the world, so you have to show the greatness of it. And when that thief is overcome, that is what we're seeing.
Yeah,
right?
he's getting
sex,
the first
he's talking about
rush.
sports cars and driving fast, and
it's probably the first rush that she had when
It's like,
she first encountered the dream.
the stuff
sand.
is intoxicating. It's 7%. You know, like he's in there for more than a page. So, you know, you can look at these elements and think about how much space are they actually being, how much of the story is being devoted to these things. That's one of the weird byproducts of comic books, is that you can look at this and say it's a 20-page story, so a page is 5%. You know, it's odd to look at it that way, but Neil Gaiman kind of breaks it down in his master class that way, that he's literally working with units of pages, you know, to figure out like how much goes in and where it goes and stuff like that. So whenever you have this thief break in, we see a page of his break in and results, and then we see him again for a half a page. Is it worth it in a short story? You know, like these are choices. That's a page and a half you don't get to devote to something else.
Our channel keeps gaining popularity, and I don't discount the possibility of us getting him in front of the hot lights. I'm going to add that question to my long list of Neil Gaiman questions for the future, man, because we'll probably have more than one conversation with him. And so one of them will be devoted to Sandman.
I think about this a lot because of page counts. You know, like frequently you're given a page count. Sometimes it's big, but even on big books, like I think on the Janes I had like 144 pages. But if you have an anthology or a short story or certainly a monthly book, like you have X amount of pages. So it really is almost like a puzzle or an equation where it's like, if I have this,
by adding
I don't
this,
have
I
room
gotta
for
take
this.
this away.
Yeah, it really is like, can you make these pieces fit in a way that communicates this story? And I think that's something that, you know, like reading these first couple of issues where they are kind of like short stories, I am constantly thinking that way and seeing like choices and thinking like that fits really well, or you have these pieces that line up. Even in a macro sense, you mentioned like those characters in the first issue, we're going to see them. You know, like it's going to fit together in 75 issues.
Yeah, I don't think we will see that guy.
Maybe,
Right,
but
right.
yeah, I don't think so. And Gaiman with this story, all those like flaws and things you're pointing out, he is so ahead of the game. With like, look at any other book that was out that month, that year, any average book that comes out now. He's doing so much and doing so much so well. This is well above average comics that we're seeing on display here.
Yeah, I think that, you know, my major beef is that ending, and I think it's totally subjective. You know, I'm not looking at that ending and saying that's bad writing. I'm looking at it and saying, I don't know about the choice, but I mean, it's a choice that fits with the story well. You know, it's almost a personal reaction I might have.
Yeah, you're very
whatever
empathetic.
biases I have in, you know, my own world.
Yeah, with the other reviews that we've done, like I've detected like this like empathy in you that like I don't have, like for the characters and stuff. So that's like what you're explaining, because I never thought of it. It's like, yeah, you know, like give her a happy ending, whatever, man. And I don't know if junkie is like, I mean, it's pejorative, but you know what I'm saying. Like, if we lose our careers after this episode, or some shit like that.
no, right.
Yeah, like we mean no disrespect. But for me, like the addiction part of it, I mean, it's a big part of it, but like it's not the biggest deal to me. You know, I'm less. I mean, I have empathy and shit, but like
I think of you know, Speedy or something, or
yeah,
you know, like
it ain't
like
quite that bad.
Right, it's not quite that bad, but it's also not quite. You know, it's not quite
Yeah, I can't think of
a
like
portrait of what this is like.
Not
or
at all.
anything.
Not at all.
You know, it's still a cartoony version. If you're dealing with this, I could see you having a sensitive reaction to it.
Absolutely.
I feel like when we're reading these things, we're creators. And so sometimes you're reading it and you got your like creator hat on and you're looking at choices and, oh, that's an interesting and you're looking at it as like mechanics. And then sometimes you fall into reader mode and you get like swept along with the narrative and start feeling things. So it's just a matter of like when that happens and when that doesn't happen for you.
All right, I think that concludes Sandman number 3. You can like, follow, and subscribe. Be sure to hit the little bell icon button below to notify you when we post a new video.
If you want to support the channel, you could grab some stuff from our spread shop. There are links in the description below.
You can follow me on Twitter at Tom Sholey or Instagram at Tom_Sholey.
And you all know what your marching orders are.
Read more comics.